Some families unravel in the open, torn apart by scandal, war, or violence that leaves records behind. Others decay quietly, hidden by geography and silence, until the damage becomes something no one can ignore. Deep in the folded hollows of America's oldest mountains, where the Appalachian ridges twist inward like a clenched fist, there exists a story that refuses to stay buried. A truth whispered for generations, passed mouth to ear, never written down until fear demanded explanation. This is not a tale of the supernatural. It is the record of bloodlines turned inward. Of families so isolated they became their own closed system. And of how medical reality, misunderstood, unnamed, and untreated, gave birth to one of America's most unsettling vampire legends. In the winter of 1887, residents of eastern Kentucky and the borderlands of West Virginia began telling stories about the Blue People. They were said to emerge only at dusk, slipping from the tree line as the sun fell low. Their skin carried a strange hue, not pale, not bruised, but tinted blue, like twilight trapped beneath flesh. Some claimed the color shimmered faintly in dying light. Others swore it was dull and lifeless, as if the blood beneath their skin had gone cold. These figures avoided daylight. They moved quietly. And they belonged to a family that few outsiders ever saw up close. They were called the Coldwaters. The Coldwater clan lived deep within the wooded valleys of Harlan County, on land so remote that even neighboring mountain families rarely crossed paths with them. Their homestead sat beyond narrow dirt trails, hemmed in by steep ridges and dense forest, natural barriers that turned isolation into permanence. By the late 19th century, that isolation had become absolute. What locals didn't understand, what they couldn't yet name, was that the Coldwaters were not cursed. They were concentrated. Their bloodlines folded back on themselves again and again, through cousin marriages, sibling unions, and relationships so close they were never spoken aloud. Fear filled the gaps where knowledge should have been. "The Coldwaters ain't right," wrote Samuel Hatfield in his journal in 1889, one of the earliest surviving written accounts. "Their skin's the color of evening. They flinch from sunlight like it scorches them. Folks say they marry cousin to cousin, brother to sister, have done for generations." Hatfield described children born wrong somehow. Some never learned to speak clearly. Others stared too long, eyes set oddly in their skulls. When they smiled, their gums pulled back unnaturally, revealing teeth that looked too sharp for human mouths. The Appalachian Mountains had always created pockets of people cut off from the wider world. After the Civil War, as industry crept closer and towns expanded, many families retreated even further into the hills, seeking privacy, familiarity, and protection from change. For the Coldwaters, that retreat became a trap. Local physician Dr. Edmund Clark encountered the family repeatedly during the 1870s and 1880s. His medical journals, dry in tone but chilling in content, offered the first clinical glimpse behind the folklore. "The Coldwater family presents a phenomenon unlike any I have studied," Clark wrote. "Their skin bears a bluish cast unknown in medical literature. Examination reveals irregular heart rhythms, blood of unusual thickness, and extreme sensitivity to sunlight." But it was the children that disturbed him most. In the youngest generation, deformities are pronounced. Joint malformations. Asymmetrical skulls. Cognitive impairment that worsens with each birth. Clark did not yet have the language to describe what he was seeing. Genetics as a field did not exist. But the pattern was unmistakable. Each generation fared worse than the one before. The family's origin could be traced to a single man, Isaiah Coldwater. In 1831, Isaiah migrated from Virginia and settled the mountain land with his wife Sarah, who was also his first cousin. They arrived with 3 children, already bound by overlapping bloodlines. As decades passed, the family expanded inward rather than outward. Opportunities for marriage beyond the clan dwindled, and by the 1850s, cousin marriages became routine. By the 1880s, rumors spoke of unions even closer than that, relationships that mountain law technically allowed but social customs strongly discouraged. What the surrounding communities couldn't comprehend was the underlying cause. The Coldwaters carried a rare recessive genetic condition, what modern medicine would later identify as methemoglobinemia. The disorder reduced the blood's ability to carry oxygen, leaving skin tinged blue and bodies chronically starved for air. But that was only the most visible symptom. Combined with generations of consanguinity, other disorders accumulated: bleeding diseases, neurological impairments, skeletal deformities, and extreme photosensitivity. Together, these traits aligned eerily with folk descriptions of vampires. Sun avoidance, abnormal blood, unusual teeth, weakness relieved only through iron-rich diets. The family's habits only fueled suspicion. They conducted business after sunset, venturing into town when the sun no longer burned their skin. When forced into daylight, they wore heavy clothing regardless of season: wide hats, gloves, layers meant to shield fragile flesh. A traveling doctor once advised them to eat rare meat to combat their constant fatigue and anemia. Locals watched them purchase liver and organ cuts in disturbing quantities. "They eat like something's wrong inside them," whispered townsfolk. "They crave blood. They keep to themselves," recalled shopkeeper Eliza Thompson in an 1891 account. "I only see the Coldwater men after dark. Polite enough. But there's something in their eyes. A wildness. They're children. Lord help them. Some twisted. Some never speak. My grandmother used to say when blood gets too close, nature finds a way to punish it." In time, the Coldwaters became a living warning, examples of what happened when families defied what mountain folk called natural law. By 1892, for generations lived on the property. Isaiah, now in his 80s. His children, many married to cousins. Their children, repeating the same unions. And a fourth generation marked by severe deformity, mental impairment, and in some cases, violent behavior the family struggled to control. These youngest children became the center of both medical concern and whispered horror. The Coldwater story was not unique, but it was extreme. Across Appalachia, isolation had quietly bred similar patterns. But no other family's suffering aligned so perfectly with the myths already waiting to explain it. Thus, a distinctly American vampire legend took shape, not born from castles or aristocracy, but from cabins, blood disorders, and mountains that kept secrets far too well. And this was only the beginning. As the 19th century drew toward its close, the Coldwater homestead ceased to feel like a family settlement and began to resemble a sealed system, one that recycled the same blood, the same traits, and the same suffering with each passing decade. By 1890, more than 40 people lived within the Coldwater compound. The cabins, rough-hewn, darkened structures connected by dirt paths, formed a small village hidden beneath the forest canopy. Smoke rose from their chimneys at odd hours. Lamps glowed long after midnight. Daylight, when it touched the place at all, seemed unwelcome. County records from the Harlan courthouse quietly documented what locals only whispered about. Between 1840 and 1890, 23 marriage licenses were issued to Coldwater family members. 17 were between first cousins. 4 involved second cousins. 2 were unions between uncle and niece, legal under the statutes of the time, though deeply frowned upon even in remote mountain communities. What the paperwork failed to capture were the relationships never recorded. Children born without documentation. Partners too closely related to be acknowledged publicly. Bonds formed in isolation, far from courts, churches, or witnesses. Dr. Edmund Clark's journals painted the most disturbing picture of all. "Of 12 births I have attended in this family over the last decade," he wrote, 9 displayed immediate abnormalities. 3 did not survive infancy. Those who lived bore unmistakable marks of their inheritance. He catalogued deformities with clinical restraint: misshapen skulls, limbs that bent unnaturally, joints that swelled and failed. I set too far apart. Others crowded together. Blood samples examined under his microscope revealed irregular corpuscles, poorly formed and slow-moving. Clark lacked the vocabulary of modern genetics, but he understood the pattern well enough. "This is no coincidence," he wrote. "This is accumulation." Beyond the blue skin that first caught the eye, the Coldwaters suffered from a constellation of disorders. Hemophilia caused minor injuries to bleed dangerously. Porphyria created intense sensitivity to sunlight and, in severe cases, hallucinations and psychological disturbances. Developmental delays affected speech, coordination, and cognition. Each generation carried more of the burden. Isaiah Coldwater did not see it that way. According to family recollections later recorded by neighbors, the patriarch believed fiercely in the idea of preserved blood. Outsiders, he claimed, carried weakness and corruption. Only within the family could strength be maintained. Our blood is different, he was said to tell his children. It must stay with its own kind. That belief hardened into law within the household. Marriage outside the clan was discouraged, then forbidden outright. Children were raised with the understanding that family loyalty meant blood loyalty. By 1893, the consequences of this ideology could no longer be denied. The youngest Coldwaters struggled to meet basic developmental milestones. Some did not walk until age 5 or 6. Others never spoke beyond fractured sounds. Several exhibited violent outbursts, sudden rages that family members restrained in locked rooms or isolated cabins. Physical changes grew more pronounced. Teeth erupted irregularly, with enlarged canines that forced lips apart even at rest, a condition later identified as hypodontia. Skin grew thinner, paler, and more translucent. In some children, veins were visible beneath the surface, dark and branching like roots beneath frostbitten ground. Light became unbearable. Several family members could not tolerate even indirect sunlight. Windows were shuttered. Curtains thickened. Rooms were kept perpetually dim. When travel was unavoidable, they moved at dusk or after nightfall, shielding their faces as though from fire. Local accounts grew darker. I saw the youngest Coldwater boy last fall, reported shopkeeper Thomas Wilson. Couldn't have been more than 12, but his face looked old. Not aged, old. His skin weren't just blue. It was see-through. You could watch the veins move. When I handed him candy, his hand shook so bad he dropped it. His father said the boy had weak joints. But it weren't just weakness. Something was broken in how he was put together. The family's diet drew increasing attention. Chronic anemia plagued nearly every Coldwater. To compensate, Dr. Clark prescribed iron-rich foods, organ meats, liver, heart. In severe cases, he recommended tonics containing animal blood, a common medical practice of the era. To outsiders, it looked obscene. They buy more liver than any family I've ever known, Butcher James Harmon told neighbors. 5-6 pounds at a time. Barely cook it. Just warm it through. When I asked why, Ephraim Coldwater smiled with those teeth of his and said, "Only blood builds blood." I didn't sleep right after that. Night became the family's domain. Children in nearby towns sang rhymes meant to frighten one another back indoors. Blue face, sharp tooth. Coldwater's coming after youth. Hide away before the night, or you won't see morning light. By the mid-1890s, fear turned into something more organized. In August of 1894, community leaders in the town of Pineville held a meeting to discuss what they delicately referred to as the Coldwater situation. The minutes, preserved in the County Historical Society, reveal a town divided between pity and revulsion. Reverend Miller questioned whether Christian duty demanded intervention, citing reports of severely deformed children hidden from public view. Dr. Clark argued that the family's condition stemmed from biology, not sin, though he admitted the practice of close intermarriage violated natural law as he understood it. Sheriff Wilson noted that no crimes had been committed. No laws broken. Personal disgust, he said, could not justify legal action. The meeting ended without resolution. Unofficial punishment followed instead. Businesses quietly refused service. Children were warned away from Coldwater land. When livestock began turning up dead on neighboring farms, throats torn, blood drained by predators, rumors immediately pointed uphill. The Coldwaters responded by retreating even further. They grew their own crops, raised livestock, bartered only when necessary. Each withdrawal tightened the genetic noose. In 1895, tragedy struck in a way that could not be ignored. Ruth Coldwater, age 9, daughter of Ephraim and his first cousin, died after a violent seizure. Dr. Clark's notes describe a child who never progressed beyond toddler-level cognition, required constant care, and bled uncontrollably during fits. Her skin, he noted, was nearly transparent. She exhibited extreme vascular visibility, he wrote. Veins appearing black rather than blue. Death followed prolonged seizure and hemorrhaging. Ruth's death cracked Isaiah's certainty. Now in his late 80s, the patriarch reportedly began to question whether the blood he had guarded so fiercely was purifying or failing. For the first time, he spoke of seeking spouses beyond the family. But the damage was done. Decades of rumors, visible deformity, and whispered fear had rendered the Coldwaters untouchable. No family wished to bind themselves to a bloodline so visibly deteriorated. By the turn of the century, the fifth generation bore the heaviest burden yet. Dr. Clark's successor, Dr. William Townsend, inherited the case files and added his own grim observations. The youngest Coldwaters represent the most severe manifestations of consanguinity I have encountered, he wrote in 1902. These conditions surpass the blue skin that marked earlier generations. We now see profound neurological impairment, skeletal deformity, and extreme photosensitivity. One child in particular drew his attention. Silas Coldwater, 13 years old. Born to parents who were closely related even by Coldwater standards, Silas embodied the family's decline. His skin was so translucent that blood vessels mapped his body in marbled patterns. Sunlight blistered his flesh within minutes. His canine teeth grew long and thick, forcing his mouth partially open at rest. Yet his mind remained sharp. Painfully so. Silas understood his condition. Understood what he was becoming. And understood what it cost his family to keep him alive. Severe anemia left him weak, confused, and near collapse. To treat it, Dr. Townsend performed regular blood transfusions, crude by modern standards, but medically sound. Blood was drawn from Silas's brother Jeremiah, who displayed milder symptoms, and administered directly. The procedure saved Silas repeatedly. But the town saw something else entirely. They're bleeding the healthy ones to feed the cursed, claimed midwife Martha Collins. That ain't medicine. You can't fix bad blood with more bad blood. Rumors spread faster than facts ever could. By 1903, the Coldwaters were no longer merely wrong. They were something feared. And as the youngest generation weakened, desperation took root inside the compound. The stage was set for a winter that would change everything. By the first years of the new century, the Coldwater family existed in a state of suspended decay, alive, but only just. Each winter thinned them further. Each birth carried more risk than hope. And among them all, one figure stood at the center of both fear and fragile survival. Silas Coldwater did not look like a boy who would reach adulthood. At 13, he was confined to darkened rooms, his body wrapped in layers even during summer. His skin, already unnaturally pale in childhood, had become almost glass-like, revealing the slow crawl of blood beneath the surface. Prolonged exposure to light blistered him. Movement exhausted him. Without regular transfusions, his mind clouded and his body failed. Only one person could sustain him. Jeremiah Coldwater. 16 years old and broad-shouldered, Jeremiah was an anomaly among his kin. Though his skin carried the same bluish cast and his teeth bore the family's peculiar shape, his strength was undeniable. He worked the land with ease, lifted loads that should have required 2 men, and endured blood loss from transfusions without immediate collapse. To Silas, Jeremiah was not merely a brother. He was life. Local logger Thomas Jenkins described seeing Jeremiah one night, lantern hooded tight, moving quickly down the mountain trail to fetch Dr. Townsend. He carried that light like it was poison, Jenkins recalled. Kept it shielded so it wouldn't touch the boy's eyes. Didn't say much. Just worry in his face. Not the look of a monster. The look of someone who knows he's losing something he can't save. Within the family, Jeremiah became both asset and burden. His relative health made him valuable, perhaps the last chance to introduce strength into the bloodline. Isaiah Coldwater, now frail and slipping into dementia, made a decision he would have once condemned. In 1905, an arrangement was struck. A neighboring family, the Simmonses, struggling to hold onto their land, agreed to marry their 15-year-old daughter to Jeremiah. In exchange, they received a significant parcel of Coldwater property. It was not romance. It was survival. Mary Simmons arrived at the compound in October of that year. She was the first true outsider to live among the Coldwaters in decades. Mary's letters, later preserved in county records, offer the only clear window into daily life inside the compound. "The stories don't tell you how sad this place is," she wrote 3 months after her arrival. "Jeremiah is kind. Strong beyond any man I've known. His skin is blue, yes, but in some light it's more grey, like storm clouds. He works until exhaustion and never complains." She wrote of Silas with unease. "He stays in rooms kept dark with heavy curtains. I have only seen him a few times. He looks like someone already dead. His eyes are too large. His skin so pale you can see every vein. Twice a month, the doctor comes and draws blood from Jeremiah to give to Silas. It keeps him alive, though it leaves my husband weak for days." Mary noticed things others had long ceased to question. Children who never spoke. Rooms that remained locked. Sounds at night that did not quite resemble human voices. "They watch me constantly," she wrote. "Especially when I'm near the youngest ones. Jeremiah says some are too affected to be seen. I hear noises behind those locked doors. I try not to listen." Mary believed, had to believe, that her presence would help. "Jeremiah promises our children will be different," she wrote. "That my blood will strengthen them." Yet month after month passed without pregnancy. Among the elders, suspicion took root. Mary was not Coldwater blood. She was outside blood. And she had brought no child. For Silas, Mary represented something else entirely. As his condition worsened and transfusions became more frequent, resentment crept in. Jeremiah's time and strength were no longer solely his. Mary had claimed a portion of what Silas depended upon. Her letters grew darker. "Silas watches me when he thinks I don't see," she wrote. "He only leaves his rooms after sunset, wrapped in scarves and a wide hat. Last night, I found him standing outside our cabin, staring at the window. When I opened the door, he said he could hear my heart beating from where he stood. Strong blood, he called it." Jeremiah dismissed her fear. "He says Silas doesn't mean harm," Mary wrote. "That his illness affects his mind. But I've begun locking the doors at night." Then came the winter of 1906 to 1907. One of the harshest in living memory. Snow buried the mountain paths. Drifts blocked the narrow trails. The Coldwater compound was cut off from town for nearly 3 months. No doctor. No supplies. No escape. Food dwindled. Medicine vanished. For Silas and the others most affected, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. Jeremiah continued the transfusions without medical supervision. Each time weakened him further. Without sterile equipment or proper care, the procedures grew dangerous. Mary's final letter, dated February 18, 1907, is a document of mounting desperation. "The winter will not break," she wrote. "Silas can barely rise from his bed. His hunger grows. Jeremiah is so weak from giving blood he can scarcely stand." The elders discussed using animal blood. They slaughtered a pig and collected it in a bowl. Silas threw it against the wall, screaming that only family blood would work now. Her fear sharpened. "They look at me differently," she wrote. "As if measuring. They whispered that I have brought no children and that my blood may be used to save true Coldwater blood. Jeremiah swears he won't let them harm me. But he grows weaker each day." She planned to flee. "I will try to leave when the storm clears," she wrote. "I don't know if I can reach town before freezing, or being followed. There were no more letters. When spring finally loosened the mountain's grip, Dr. Townsend forced his way back to the property. His journal entry dated April 3, 1907, is the last clinical account of the family as it once existed. Reached Coldwater compound after arduous travel. Found conditions far worse than expected. Of 36 family members previously treated, only 27 remain. Multiple deaths during isolation months. Silas Coldwater deceased despite repeated transfusions. Jeremiah lived, barely. Mary was gone. The family claimed she had left during a February thaw. No one in town had seen her. Behind the main house, Townsend counted fresh graves, too many to match the deaths described. When he attempted to investigate further, the family resisted. "I have grave concerns," he wrote, particularly regarding the missing Mary Coldwater. "Will report suspicions to Sheriff Wilson, though I expect little action." He was right. But the damage was done. What had once been a story of medical tragedy was about to transform into something far darker. And the mountains were listening. Sheriff Elijah Wilson arrived at the Coldwater property in May of 1907, escorted by 2 deputies and a doctor who no longer believed what he was seeing could be explained by illness alone. The thaw had come late that year. The ground was soft. And it did not want to stay closed. Wilson had handled murder, moonshining disputes, even lynch mobs, but nothing prepared him for the silence of the Coldwater compound. No dogs barked. No children played. The buildings sat too still, like structures already abandoned by life. Isaiah Coldwater did not recognize the sheriff. He stood in the doorway, hunched and trembling, his eyes clouded white with cataracts. When Wilson asked about Mary, the old man smiled faintly. "She fed us," Isaiah said. "That winter, she fed us well." The words were spoken gently, casually. Dr. Townsend later wrote that this was the moment he realized the family had crossed a line so gradual they no longer knew it existed. Behind the main house, Wilson ordered the ground disturbed. The Coldwaters protested, not violently, but with panic. Several wailed. Others collapsed outright. Jeremiah, skeletal and barely able to stand, begged them to stop. "She's gone," he said. "She left. Please. There's nothing there but sickness." The first shovel struck wood less than 2 feet down. Then cloth. Then hair. Mary Simmons Coldwater was found in pieces. Her remains were not buried as a body, but divided, portioned. Bones stripped clean. Deep cuts along the femur and ribs, precise in a way hunger alone could not explain. More graves followed. Not all held strangers. Some held children previously recorded as stillborn. Others contained only fragments, skulls without bodies, torsos without limbs. Dr. Townsend documented bite marks. Human teeth. Repeated. Patterned. Not frenzied, but deliberate. The sheriff halted the dig when one deputy vomited and another began praying aloud. Word spread faster than Wilson could contain it. By nightfall, men from town had gathered at the mountain's edge, carrying rifles, lanterns, and rope. They did not need instructions. Appalachia had dealt with monsters before. The Coldwaters barricaded themselves inside. Jeremiah tried to surrender. Silas had been dead less than 2 months, yet his room was still sealed. When deputies forced the door open, they found the bed soaked black with old blood. The walls were scratched, long, dragging marks that suggested fingers too weak to lift, but desperate to pull. On the floor, bowls. Dried. Dark. No animals were missing from nearby farms. The siege lasted 1 night. What happened inside was never fully agreed upon. Some claimed the family turned on one another. Others swore shapes moved inside the windows long after gunfire stopped, figures too thin, too tall, their mouths dark and wet. By dawn, the compound burned. Official records list 11 bodies recovered. Locals insist there were more. Jeremiah Coldwater was never found. nor was Mary's skull. In the years that followed, livestock were discovered drained of blood along the ridges. Children spoke of pale figures moving between trees. Hunters reported being followed silently at dusk, their lanterns failing without reason. The Coldwater land was abandoned. Then avoided. Then forgotten, at least officially. But stories do not need records to survive. They need witnesses. Even now, hikers report finding shallow depressions behind the ruins, places where the earth has sunk, as if something beneath continues to shift. The mountains remember blood. And sometimes, when the fog rolls low and the hollows go quiet, locals say you can still hear it. A slow, dragging breath. And footsteps that never quite touch the ground. Officially, the Coldwater case ended in ash. The sheriff's report was filed. The land was condemned. The surviving records were sealed under the justification of public stability. By the fall of 1907, the state declared the incident resolved. But mountains do not respect paperwork. Within weeks of the fire, reports began to surface, quiet at first, spoken only in kitchens and hunting camps. Farmers found livestock collapsed in their fields, their bodies intact but emptied, blood pooled beneath them as if poured out with intention. Chickens stopped laying. Dogs refused to cross certain tree lines, whining and pulling back no matter how hard they were dragged. Sheriff Wilson dismissed it as hysteria. Privately, he stopped sleeping. In a letter to his brother dated November 1907, he wrote, "Something left that mountain. I don't know what form it took, but I know it's not bound to that land anymore." He resigned the following spring. No replacement would patrol the area after dark. In 1912, a traveling school teacher named Clara Whitcomb recorded an encounter while boarding with a family near the old Coldwater Ridge. She woke just before dawn to the sound of breathing outside her window. Not footsteps. Not speech. Breath. Measured. Slow. As though whoever stood there was conserving energy. When she pulled back the curtain, she saw nothing, only the impression of feet in the frost below. Bare. Long toes splayed unnaturally wide, as if shaped by years without shoes, or by something else entirely. The prints ended abruptly at the tree line. They did not lead away. They simply stopped. By the 1920s, the stories had a name. Locals called it the Hollow Walker. Descriptions varied, but certain details never changed. A tall, emaciated figure. Skin pale to the point of translucence. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's. A mouth too wide, stained dark. Most unsettling of all was how it behaved. It did not attack openly. It watched. Followed. Waited for weakness. Children were warned never to give blood if they cut themselves outdoors. Hunters wrapped their hands in cloth before skinning deer. Women were told not to whistle at night. Sound, they said, attracted attention. In 1936, 2 boys went missing while berry picking near the ridge. Search parties found their baskets neatly arranged at the forest's edge. No blood. No struggle. Only drag marks leading uphill. The case was closed as exposure. The mothers never accepted it. In the county archives, a single medical note dated 1948 raises questions no official explanation has ever answered. A man arrived at a clinic 20 miles from Coldwater land just before sunrise. He was wrapped head to toe in heavy clothing despite the summer heat. His skin was severely photosensitive, blistering upon exposure to light. He suffered extreme anemia, yet his veins were dark and full. He refused to give his name. When asked how long he had been ill, he replied, "Since birth." The doctor noted that the patient exhibited unusual dentition, elongated canines worn flat at the tips, as well as scarring along both forearms consistent with repeated blood extraction. The man left before sunset. The clinic burned that night. The fire was ruled accidental. By the mid-20th century, the Coldwater story faded from public memory, surviving only as a half-forgotten Appalachian legend, something told to scare tourists or keep children close to home. But legends do not persist without reason. In 1983, a survey team mapping abandoned land near the original compound uncovered something impossible to reconcile. Beneath the fire-blackened foundation stones, they found tunnels. Hand-dug. Reinforced. Leading away from the main house and deep into the mountain itself. Inside were personal items. Clothing too large for children. Medical tools rusted beyond use. Bowls. And bones. Some animal. Some human. Some too eroded to classify. The tunnels were sealed. The findings quietly buried. Today, the Coldwater land remains undeveloped. Satellite imagery shows nothing unusual, just dense forest and shadowed hollows. But hikers still report odd experiences. Phones lose signal without warning. Compasses spin. The air grows heavy, metallic. And occasionally, someone hears it. Breathing. Not behind them. Beside them. As if whatever survived learned long ago that patience was the key to survival. The Coldwater bloodline may have burned that night in 1907. But something shaped by it endured. Something adapted. Something that learned how to move quietly between generations, feeding just enough to remain unseen. Because some family trees don't end. They simply go underground. If you walk those ridges today, locals will tell you the same thing they've whispered for over a century. Never bleed in the mountains. Never follow voices at dusk. And never assume a story is finished just because the records say it is. Because the hollows remember. And sometimes, they remember you. If you want more forgotten histories, buried bloodlines, and stories that were never meant to surface, subscribe. Because some pasts don't stay buried. And this wasn't the only one.